Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Student Spotlight series, where we showcase some of the work our past students have done. Today, it is our pleasure to have with us Alex Chen. So, Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what year of school you're in, and a little bit about the course you've taken with CCIR?
Hi, yeah, my name is Alex Chen. I am a junior at Basis Independent Silicon Valley. I'm from California, and I was on the one-on-one research mentorship program at CCIR, and I sort of did research here. Yeah,
So, can you say a little bit about how you became interested in the program?
I became interested in this program after I was told about it by one of my friends or family members. I can't exactly remember which one, but as soon as I realized that it was research based, I became very interested because I've always been very interested in research, particularly in the sort of field of behavioral economics, which is why I decided to apply in the first place.
So, can you say a little bit also about how the mentorship program was structured? I guess what were the kind of learning objectives coming in and how did you approach?
Yeah, so throughout the program, it was split into two parts. The first part was mainly about learning how to do research, sort of what parts there are to research in the first place. And then the second part, we actually started doing the research, going through all the data sets, performing all the linear regressions, and doing all the everything that's necessary for research in the first place.
So, what was the topic of your research project?
So the topic of my research project is essentially the effect of cultural tightness, which is a certain aspect of a culture, on how much people are willing to actually reply or rather comply with donation requests from charities. So what this essentially means is that cultural tightness is the cultural aspect in which the tighter a culture is, the more culture affects their actions themselves. And so what I hypothesized was that with tighter cultures, people were more willing to comply with donation requests because it was sort of in their culture to help each other out. And yeah, that's how I came up with my research.
How did you choose the topic, and what kind of support did you get from your instructor, your mentor, in choosing a topic?
Yeah. So this topic is a little bit obscure, but I came up with it after I've actually done previous research in the past. So in the past, I didn't do any research similar to what I did at CCIR, but I did some literature reviews. So as a result, after studying a lot about charities, donor behavior, and the different aspects of donor behavior, I learned about how there are actually certain holes in the research regarding certain how cultural aspects actually affect research or rather donor behavior in the first place. And there wasn't actually a lot of research on this. So what ended up happening was that I developed a research question on my own. I proposed it to my research mentor and he approved it, which is how I came to this topic.
Can you say a little bit about what drove your prior interest in charities, or I guess behavior relating to donating?
Right, yeah. So in the past, I've done a literature review on charities and how donor behavior changes depending on multiple aspects. And I was very interested in this starting out because I actually do run a charity of my own. Rather, I guess in the past, I started a nonprofit organization dedicated to sort of helping international students with education, and we held fundraisers, which ended up raising around 15,000 US dollars worth of money. And we were able to sort of use this money in order to help certain rural students in particularly China finally obtain education where they were otherwise unable to obtain education in the first place. And so because of this, I became more interested in the topic of charitable giving, as well as what affects people's behaviors um, when it comes to being willing to give out money. And especially considering that in economics, the field that I'm interested in, usually we assume um, self or rather perfect rationality, which means that people are inherently sort of selfish, I guess. Um, and so because of this sort of discrepancy between the theory and reality, I decided to go in further and do research on my own.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make. It seems like, I guess, traditional theories of economics might have a hard time accounting for the rationality of giving to charity. Though I suppose it's kind of telling too that we presume from the outset that that to behave rationally is to behave selfishly. Maybe that's in itself questionable. But going back to your research project with CCIR, what was your methodology or what was your approach to answering or testing your hypothesis?
Right. So there was actually something very interesting that occurred throughout my research journey, and I want to elaborate it a little bit more here. And it's that I actually started with a slightly different question at first. While it was still talking about cultural tightness, this particular cultural aspect, I actually tried to answer a different question by first going through all of the data sets, trying to find data sets that would help me find correlations and relationships between these different variables. And after I found my data sets and ran the regression, I didn't actually find anything that was really worth mentioning in research. But instead, I found a different relationship after I compared one of my data sets with a slightly different data set from what I was originally trying to look for. And so what eventually occurred was that I switched to using that data set instead and developed a whole story behind it regarding how cultural tightness is able to affect people's willingness to comply with donation requests rather than my original research question, which was how it affected donation rates across a nation.
So what were you measuring exactly when you were sort of trying to test this hypothesis?
Right. So I was trying to essentially measure how much people are willing to comply with donation requests. So what this means is that when people are receiving, um, when people are being asked to donate to a charity, what percentage of people are actually willing to comply with that and actually donate when asked? So this is slightly different compared to what I previously thought would be my research question. And the way I did this was by using a measurement from the World Giving Index called the Stranger Help Index. Essentially, what this index was is that it measured the percentage of individuals who claimed that they helped a stranger in the past year. And so while um, this isn't inherently part of charity, it isn't, well, helping people is part of charity, but it's not directly giving money to charity. It has a lot of parallels with actually complying with donation requests because to help a stranger, you need to be asked for help. You need to be willing to help someone that you see needs help. And so how charities work is that they come to you and they sort of ask you for help, which is exactly what this index measures. And so essentially, I use this as an approximation for donation request compliance rates across multiple nations. And so I was able to create a cross-cultural study, or rather cross-country study, in which multiple countries were studied using this index and matched up with a cultural tightness index in order to find a relationship.
Can you say a little bit about how cultural tightness is measured or evaluated?
Yeah, so I actually used a separate index to measure cultural tightness. This index was by, I believe, a research paper by, I think, a psychologist named uh, Iram Uz. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the name, but essentially what they did was they evaluated many historical aspects, used multiple polls, and used all of that to sort of compile their data in order to create an accurate index based on sort of the different the definition of cultural tightness. So, for example, they measured the variation of people's responses to various polls regarding cultural aspects within their nation. And after using multiple of these polls, they create an index in which a lower number meant a tighter culture and a higher number meant a looser culture. And like I said before, a tighter culture is a culture in which their own culture affects their actions more so than a looser culture.
So what were the key insights or takeaways at the end? Did you find that tighter cultures, I guess, were correlated with higher rates of giving, or I guess a higher likelihood of giving when asked?
Yeah, so surprisingly, yes, I did. This happened after I realized that my original research question wasn't really going to work. I played around with the data sets a little bit more, and I realized that there was a relatively strong correlation between cultural tightness and the Stranger Help Index. And so I was able to develop the story behind it, which I think is one of the greatest insights that I've developed, which is to be able to sort of develop a story from the data that I have. Because on one hand, I want to be able to create research that's unique, original, and actually contributes to existing literature. But on the other hand, I don't want to be falsifying my data. And so if I'm able to combine these two successfully, which I did here, I was able to create my own research paper in which I found a very strong correlation between cultural tightness and the compliance rates for charities.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So I guess this is a correlation that you saw in the data, and then you sort of took a step back and tried to figure out why that might be the case, if I'm understanding correctly. So I guess, what story did you put together, or how did you support the kind of causal account that you gave to explain what you saw in the data?
Right. So I sort of determined causation based off of the past literature that I already had. More importantly, I use three key aspects of donor behavior, or rather aspects that would affect donor behavior in past literature, and combine them with multiple studies from cultural tightness and looseness and social psychology. And so using this, I was able to determine that there are three key aspects that cultural tightness affected that also affected donor behavior, more specifically reciprocity, the warm glow effect, as well as, I believe, um, not reciprocity, warm glow effect, as well as um, shoot, I forgot the last one, but essentially these two, essentially I found multiple reasons why there would be a correlation in the first place. And not only that, I actually found past research that indicated that there would be a relationship specifically with donor behavior and cultural tightness. However, that research was a little bit limited because it only compared South Koreans and Americans rather than across multiple nations. And so I believe my research successfully contributed to the literature that already exists regarding cultural tightness and donor behavior through determining causation with the past literature that already existed and supporting it using a correlational finding.
So you mentioned reciprocity and what you call the warm glow effect. Can you say a little bit more about what those are? Like, can you tell me a little bit more of that, I guess, that story that you intended to tell in your paper?
Yeah, so essentially, reciprocity is the idea that people donate because they expect something back in the future. And this was extremely prominent in studies conducted regarding people's willingness to donate to colleges when their children were about to go to those colleges. And so they found that there were higher rates of donation when these parents found that their student could have a chance at going into the college that they're donating to. And I believe that there are several existing um, research regarding how cultural tightness actually will affect this as well, because people who are willing to adhere to the culture, which in this case is donating money, actually gains greater social upstanding. And so because of this, there would be a greater reciprocity effect to donors. Now, regarding the warm glow effect essentially states that people feel better when they donate. And so the warm glow effect explains a lot of the different variations between what's expected versus what actually occurs when people donate. And it's especially strong when considering how cultural tightness affects it as well, because cultural tightness states that, or rather, multiple papers on cultural tightness state that tighter cultures actually have a stronger sense with the community. And so naturally, they would feel better about donating to the community as a whole as well. And so using this, I was able to determine that tighter cultures had a greater sense of warm glow when they donated. And so there would be a causal relationship between these two things.
So you mentioned earlier that you found it interesting that there was kind of a gap between what would be predicted by kind of traditional kind of economic analyses of behavior and the behavior or the motives that surround donating. So on the one hand, with reciprocity, it seems pretty clear that you could reconcile that with kind of scheme of pure self-interested behavior. But the warm glow, it seems more difficult. Do you have any thoughts on, I guess, where your research fits in with, or how it's in dialogue, or maybe contains an implicit criticism of the traditional kind of economic behavior model?
Yeah, so I believe my research doesn't necessarily remove like the old ideas regarding people being self-interested. Rather, the warm glow effect is originally hypothesized to be a cause of or rather be an effect of evolution. More specifically, people evolved to donate to their communities because it allowed their communities to survive much better than communities in which everyone was more self-interested. And so naturally, people began developing a positive relationship between donating things and their own feelings. And so this causes people to have a warm glow effect when donating. And so while this does sort of disprove much of the existing economic theories regarding people being self-interested, I believe that this still very much fits well within existing economic research, which uses more statistical methods rather than theoretical methods in order to determine how people will behave in real life compared to in theory.
So was there anything that you discovered in the process that really surprised you, or any kind of, I guess sort of secondary conclusions that you didn't expect?
Yeah, so some secondary conclusions that I didn't expect. Well, the biggest one is something that I probably should have expected from the beginning, and it's that things that I hypothesize don't necessarily become reality if I look at the data. And this was especially clear when I first started doing this research, in which I tried to find the data sets for my first research question. And after I didn't find any results, I was a little bit dejected. However, over time, I realized that I couldn't just stop there. I played around with the data sets more, and then I found a different relationship. So one of the biggest insights that I gained was the fact that even though research may not necessarily uh, prove your own hypothesis, you're going to be able to change your own beliefs, or rather your own processes of thinking, if you were to actually do the research and actively search for the truth. And so I think this is a key insight, although it's not directly related to, I guess, the topic of my research question. It was a very um, important conclusion that I reached near the end of my time in this program.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it is sort of more of a meta conclusion about, what it means to do research. But I think that that is very important, right? Because it's definitely so easy to come in uh, with the intent to prove something, and then you do, sort of go about your research in such a way that that's the only possible outcome. And I think it's good to be conscious of I guess that bias, and be open to changing your mind. So this is, I wonder if this might be somewhat beyond the scope of your research, but was there a normative aspect to any of what you wrote? Which is to say, do you feel like it's cultural tightness is something that's in itself desirable, or that should be encouraged?
I don't necessarily believe that cultural tightness should be encouraged or discouraged. While it's good that people are more willing to donate in tighter cultures, I don't necessarily believe that it's the best option necessarily. Um, my research is primarily positive, so it's not really normative. It doesn't really say what should occur. Rather, I do say that if charities want to sort of um, obtain more money from their fundraisers, they should ideally try to campaign in more tighter regions. For example, in the United States, there are many looser cultures and tighter cultures in different states, different counties in the states, and all of that. And so I believe it does certainly um, it does certainly help in the aspect that I do tell charities where they should try to fundraise. But other than that, I'm not necessarily making a statement regarding whether or not tighter cultures are good or whether they're bad.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I do think that that's sort of outside of the scope of what you're trying to research. But I am curious. I mean, I suppose this is kind of a good transition to another thing I wanted to ask. Do you feel like what you've learned in the process of writing this research paper is going to impact how you approach your own sort of charitable activities?
Yeah, I actually believe that considering what I've researched here in this program, there are a lot of valuable lessons for me to learn when I actually do what I normally do with regards to charity. Because, like I said before, I do sort of run a charity, well, not necessarily a charity, but a nonprofit that does do fundraising in the first place. And so I believe that I'm able to use my research in order to better fundraise my money and use my money in ways that would be able to positively benefit the community more so than other ways.
So I don't mean to put you on the spot, but again, I'm very curious because I think it's really wonderful the way you've tied in your own sort of, I guess, personal commitments and your research. You clearly devote a lot of time and thought to your charity work. And in a way, I think thoughtful action is always normative. When we do something thoughtfully, I think we do it because we think it should be done. So I guess I wonder what your sort of outside of, without necessarily bringing in your research, just what do you think about, I guess, the normative value of, I guess, of creating conditions under which people are more likely to give to charity? Uh,
Yeah, I actually believe that it is very important to be able to allow for individuals to help their community more, because well, that's sort of the reason why I did my research in the first place, right? Because I want to be able to help my community by being able to do more research regarding how charities work in the first place and how people are willing to donate, essentially helping charities determine how and when to fundraise more effectively to bring a greater impact that they're trying to bring in the first place. And so I believe that people should definitely be willing to help their community more, donate more. And while I'm not necessarily saying that they absolutely need to, it's not their obligation to, I believe it is very important that we consider people who actually do give back to the community, um, whether it's actually donating money, creating charities in the first place, or even doing research on charities in order to help bring a bigger impact throughout multiple different places.
now, I wonder if this is implicit in sort of the end of what you were just saying. But so on the one hand, it seems like there's sort of you're considering the issue of cultural tightness in detachment from the behavior surrounding charitable giving or the actions of charitable organizations. But do you think that there might actually be some kind of relationship between these two variables, so to speak? Like, does charitable activity in any way contribute to cultural tightness, do you think?
I do think that if people are more willing to sort of give, there is a chance that it also means that the community is closer together. Because if communities are closer together, that usually means that the community does things to help each other. And charity is one way in which people are able to help each other within these communities. And so I definitely believe that there may be a sort of um, relationship the other way around compared to what I did research on. But I think that charitable giving is primarily influenced by cultural tightness rather than the other way around.
Yeah, certainly it seems like charity is sort of a smaller phenomenon, or rather that cultural tightness is influenced by much broader, phenomena than charitable giving by itself. But yeah, I mean, I guess I at least wonder uh, if the existence of or the prevalence of charities in a way help contributes to bringing communities closer together. Um, but I suppose it's neither here nor there. I guess I also sort of want to ask about um, maybe how you feel about, in general, about the way in which the program has prepared you to do research in the future. Do you feel like having done this, you're more confident about doing similar work going forward? Do you intend to continue sort of doing research as you head into college?
Yeah. So this program actually inspired me to do more research in the future. Right now, I'm actually reaching out to a few professors regarding possibilities for being a research assistant, even though I'm still in high school. I believe this program most certainly does set me up for a better future regarding research because it has inspired me and has taught me many different lessons on how to better create honest research that doesn't necessarily follow your beliefs, but rather guide your beliefs to the right answer in the first place. And so I've learned many valuable lessons throughout this program, and so I believe that it is a very good opportunity to sort of help me in the future become a better researcher as I pursue more behavioral economics related fields.
Have you finished your paper and are you planning to take it to any conferences or potentially publish it?
Yeah, so I actually presented this paper, or I guess I presented at a conference. I didn't necessarily finish the paper itself, but the vast majority of everything is already done. I just need to fix a few more parts of the wording, but I do certainly plan on getting it published in a research paper and possibly going to more conferences in order to better develop my paper and get more feedback with it. So yeah.
Are you getting any kind of support from CCIR in that sort of polishing or finishing process?
Yeah, CCR is actually helping me, or rather, I guess my research mentor from the CCIR program has actually suggested me a few journals to go to. For example, the International Journal of High School Research is a really good journal to publish in, especially considering that it accepts pretty much every subject, including economics and behavioral economics in this case. And he has actually also helped me out by providing me with a few possible reviewers that I can email and contact if I need any help with the submission process because they have a pretty lengthy submission process. He has also helped me provide a few conferences in which I would possibly able to submit to and sort of see if they approve me and maybe possibly even present there. So yeah.
And do you have any final thoughts about your experience that you'd like to share? Or is there anything that maybe you wish you had known coming into the program or that you would, tell anyone as advice who is going to do a similar program?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what I was going to say here has already been said before, that I learned a lot of different things regarding research, especially how I need to guide my beliefs using the actual data rather than use my beliefs to rationalize the data that exists. And um, if I were to give any advice, I would say to try to do a little bit research beforehand and know what you're going into, because I think that really helped me throughout this program because this topic is a little bit niche. And so the way I found this out was because in the past I already did research regarding charitable giving and found some holes in the literature, as I said before. And so doing the same thing that I did would be able to significantly help develop a research question in the first place, which took, I think, less than 3 minutes to approve by my mentor because I already have a lot of existing knowledge regarding this field.
Yeah, I think those are both really great pieces of advice. I think that definitely, I don't definitely coming in having a clearer sense of what you want to do can save you so much time and make the whole process so much less painful. So yeah, I think that's great advice. Um, but yeah, do you have any other thoughts that you want to share?
Not really, no.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to tell us about your experience. I'm glad it was a positive one, and I really enjoyed hearing about your research and about your work.
Thank you. I also enjoyed this interview, so